This conference will now be recorded.
And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. David Comita, who will get us launched. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Dee Dee, and thanks, everybody. Welcome to our June work group meeting. So as usual, we will, run through a brief overview of the membership, the agenda of how things are going to work in this meeting, review some of the work group logistics for anyone who may be new or not familiarize themselves with the web page and the tools. And then Bill's going to go over our collaborative tool, the forum, and recap the phase 1 of our work and the charter changes that went with it. Then the development of phase 2 in our IG guide development process. And then where the meat of the discussion will be to review the workshop that was last week, where it was clinicians and providers prompted, by the topic areas that we had all voted on in our survey. It is a really robust, great workshop. So we're going to bring back the high-level summary of the discussion there, and then the next steps moving forward. Next slide. So just to really reiterate that just the breadth of representation across the industry of 193 organizations and 298 participants, with a really diverse subject matter expertise being brought to this. And we really do still encourage you to invite any other colleagues to future discussions. This work group is really open to all, and really want to thank everybody for your ongoing support and engagement and participation. Next slide. And really the next 3 slides are just a thank you to our Sequoia members that really enables all of the interoperability matters efforts to be supported and facilitated. And this really enables us, the membership host, enables us to host this work group. So a great thank you and appreciation to all of our members. And next slide. And just, as you know, we there is there may be somebody new who's just joining for the first time. So we always give an overview of all of the workshop participants joining us for the phase 2 efforts. And then just to direct you, if you've not familiarized yourself with the web page, that has all of the calendar invites and downloads and agenda items, and all of the documents and recordings are available there. And again, for our phase 2 efforts, the meetings are going to be held once per month, and it's going to be at this time the second Thursday of each month. So if you haven't updated, your invite, which is on the website, please do so, and then you can have this on your calendar. And with that, I will hand it over to Bill.
Great, thank you, David. What I'm going to show you on the next one is kind of following on with what David just described. Is the Sequoia Project Interoperability Matters team has put together a work group forum, which is really our collaboration space. And as David mentioned, we're going to that monthly cadence. So it's going to be really important that we utilize these other media to be able to communicate and to be able to share ideas. Even if you're not able to make the monthly meetings, you can still contribute and make your voice heard as we post questions and other things for feedback. So I encourage you, go to this link, bookmark it, and use it, and we'll push out questions to it. So we'll have a little bit more leeway to push things to you to be able to prompt people. But really, we want your input, even if you're not able to join us on the calls. And so again, this is bookmarked there, as you see. for the forum. Go ahead to the next slide. So this is, I wanted to review all the different links, and you'll get this as a part of the copy of the presentation. But all the things that have happened have been updated to the Leadership Council, including the charter changes and everything like that, or really the things that we did to consolidate to a single implementation guide. And we have reference links to all the work to date. So even if you've just joined, this is where you can kind of catch up. So the first link is the Data Usability Google folder, and that really has all of the information, all the documentation that can be found on all the subsequent ones. So it's kind of like the starting point for everything. The second one is the proposed work items, and these are the ones that were identified and we voted on originally. So you can see the documents, you can see comments that people have made throughout the process, and see where that is. The third one are the category prioritization responses, and this is what happened when we polled the entire group, and the responses that we received 48 responses, and kind of how the ranking came out of that. And you'll see there that we did some different types of analyses, but really the same types of things bubbled to the top. However, our goal is to hit all of those things that we all wanted to touch on, and that's what we're moving forward. And as I mentioned briefly, the charter was updated that we're really focusing on one implementation guide to cover these the three use cases instead of three, really to kind of simplify things, both for our side, but also for the recipients of the output of this work. Go ahead to the next slide. All right, so now, as David mentioned, we're moving into phase two. As kind of the kickoff to phase two, we held that first workshop with clinicians last week, and that was meant to gather input, not on a complete greenfield, but really starting with what everybody has prioritized, and really to kind of give very focused feedback, so they could say, react to what we've all identified as important topics. Are there ways we can fine tune it and go from there? And so on the next slide, after I finish this one, we're going to go through what we discussed with that group. So as we go through these next few months, the co-chairs and the staff of the Sequoia project will start to organize and gather that content for those areas, identifying the existing specs, other documents to be considered, and actually start building the implementation guides so that you can react to them. So it's meant to really minimize the amount of work that you have to do, but as we mentioned, we want your participation. Even if it's just a reaction to something, yep, looks like it's on the right track, nope, you're missing something. So please pay attention, join the meetings when you can, but definitely pay attention to that collaboration space. And so let's go ahead to the next slide. And what we're going to go through now are each of the topics that from our topic list of our proposed work items. And this is what we shared with that workshop group. And I know some of you were on the workshop, and definitely including Tom and others, and we appreciate your participation and really spearheading of that notion. And so what I want to do is to be able to touch on a little bit, and David and I are going to go back and forth between these, kind of as we did during the workshop, and both touch on the questions that we asked this group, as well as kind of a brief summary of the responses we received. And would really welcome, we have the time for it today. I know there are other clinicians as well as non-clinicians on the call today. Add your feedback today to what we're seeing here. So the first one that we tackled was data provenance and traceability of changes. And of course, this refers to kind of following that data as it lives through its life cycle. And when someone's the recipient of that information, what do we need to share? And so some of the questions we posed to the group are, is it important to know all the users, just the originator, or only the more recent? And does it vary by type of data? And what would you consider the most important provenance information, going all the way from credentials to specialty to location? And then finally, what are the situations the most important for receiving that updated piece of clinical data? And so there was a very robust discussion on this one. And the consensus really was that making more data, we're not don't take away data. Make sure that data is available, but don't show it all at once. The UI must be able to display simply as a default, so there's no clutter. I think there was definitely a theme around that signal to noise ratio. Some of the things that were really emphasized were around the originating source, particularly for things like vital signs and others where you got to know where it was captured. Was it captured in a clinical office by a physician or nurse, or was it captured at home? And as well as the credentials, so knowing where it came from. And so, and I think you'll see that theme throughout the rest of these is kind of wanting to make sure that there's no loss of depth of the data, but we've got to have a consolidated view for the end user. So any thoughts from the group on this one, or anything you disagree with or want to add?
And Bill, just to add real quickly, we already gave them the link to the collaboration space, but we have already added, thanks to Hera from our marketing department, these topics in that collaboration space. And we would welcome you to go to the collaboration space, which is at the very bottom of the main Workgroup website. And it was the first link that I provided. If you look at the chat window, there were 3 links I provided. The first one was to this website that has the collaboration space. So again, those 7 topic categories have a collaboration space available for them that highlight the same thing that's on this slide, so kind of the summary and the questions that were asked. And we invite you to enter your name and an email. So it won't be published anywhere. It's just for us to be able to follow up with you if we have questions on your comment. But please provide, open free text comment on any of these and answer the questions. We will be pushing out a push message, since we do have a light showing today, to all the 200 plus Workgroup members. So we'll be asking for you guys to do homework between now and our next meeting, which will fall on July the 8th. So just know that we do really, really, really want you to help provide that input, because that's how we, as well as all the volunteers that are helping draft this, will be able to pull some of the straw man document pieces together, so that on the July 8th meeting we can start kind of looking at that straw man and fleshing it out with the work that we pull in based on your input month to month.
This is Tom.
Great.
I participated in the meeting, and I think that one of the things that I noticed that came up right away with this one, when you talk about signal to noise, what was very important, I thought, to people was that it facilitated the workflow and didn't get in the way of the workflow. I mean, they found it usable, to use that term, if it helped them do things actually faster and more efficiently. And when it got in their way and slowed them down, that was not a useful thing. And so I came up here, but I think it was sort of a theme through the whole workshop.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, those were the kinds of themes that did arise, and boy, that's such valuable information to really hear it from so many different frontline users. So thank you. We'll go ahead and move to the next one. I'll hand it over to David to do that and keep going.
Thanks, Bill. Just to add, one thing that we also found in the workshop was there was a lot, and what we had found in our conversations and our phase 1 work was these topics really blend. There's a lot of overlap, and they kind of blend into each other. And a lot of the discussion when we were, in each of these topics really lent itself to the other topics. And I, for one, was encouraged as well to the degree to which both, the work, it was validating to get the practicing clinicians' perspective in terms of the usability and what is important to them in terms of that signal to noise and it really being well integrated in their workflow, but also validating that the output of the work of this group in the phase one, and it informed it and it set it up for a really meaningful discussion, and then is helping inform our work going forward as well. So it's it was a really nice flow. And that just as to review, when we did that sub analysis of all our topics, this is the order in which we kind of landed on our topics, and that the top five were the top five regardless of the group, and the clinicians were all found this very much useful to discuss. And so moving on to how the topic of codes and code sets and the degree to which leveraging or their actual use, whether they're defined or not, but they're actually being used in the development of and the standard is being used as it's intended to really deliver the data in a meaningful way. And at the end of the day, as that we heard from clinicians, it's really how this is integrated into their workflow. And so whether it's codified or indexed or grouped, the important thing is how it's really served up and where it's served up for helping them in their clinical decision support and medical decision making. And again, we came up with some questions surrounding it to frame the discussion, tying the different kinds of data types that we see that can be codified, such as LOINC and CPTs and things. And so we brought up the whole COVID use case. If there are different data types that they find more meaningful in terms of the codes being able to help from visualization in their native workflow from external sources, and then any prioritization of the data elements. And what we found was in overall that a theme was having the problem list, the medications and allergies, things like vitals, things that lend themselves well but aren't necessarily all coded in the same way, and or consistently. The really interesting thing that came out of the code discussion was what we all know and we all still struggle with, which is, you can't get anywhere without, MPIs or patient identification. So regardless of how it's codified, that was really one of the most important codes that was identified as being necessary to even begin the conversation. We also had a theme of grouping of groupers of codes and indexes, and then value sets for the grouping codes, and also the different the confusion around the different naming conventions for codes of notes and things like that. So at the end of the day, it's really how this is received, consumed by that system, but to the clinician, it's really how it's then displayed in terms of making it easier for them to access that data in a the continuum of care kind of fashion. And it's just really high level there, but I found that it was very validating to have that discussion. Again, bringing it back to the signal and noise ratio was really important to the clinicians. So with that brief summary, are there any additional thoughts or comments to add on to this from this group?
Yeah, I have a dumb question, and I apologize. These are excellent questions that you guys are showing, and we see how effective they probably were for catalyzing that discussion. Are the answers or the sort of these straw conclusions that you're alluding to, are they going to be written up later to kind of marry with these excellent questions?
Yeah, and that's the intent, is to, we're right now just giving a high level summary, but we want to really dive into the granular aspect and map the questions and then the feedback from the clinical group and integrate that into the work that we're doing here. So, and that will also within the further feedback that we get on the collaboration forum, to actually have these reference documents available in a more granular way. So yes.
So one additional comment there, in that way, is that you've referenced signal to noise a couple times, and really it's, I look at it as the completeness of data that is supplied from the responder and the capability of the receiver or the requester to visualize it in the most appropriate way. As you look at a deeper dive into the details as to which stakeholder is responsible for what aspect of this. So when you're starting to look at these responses and what is needed, who's going to ultimately be the implementers of this? Because it's both ends of the pipeline that we're talking about. It's getting that complete data from the responder, but it's also, if you're talking about user experience, the responder's not going to do that. It is the requester that's going to do that, and how they assimilate, how they reconcile that information, how they present it ultimately, and filter it down to be very usable.
Yeah, this is Bill. I think you're exactly right, and that's the intent with these implementation guides. Is we're not looking at it as just the sender who creates the data or sends the data, or the requester. It will be all of the above. And some of the things that came up were around style sheets and ways that we can make it easier for the vendor, say on the recipient side, to render things in ways that are consistent, irrespective of what platform you're using, including how you would. Boy, if I want to dive deeper, here's how I get there. So style sheets and other types of things that might be part of the recommendations and the implementation guides.
Thanks.
And the Sequoia project team they are going through, and as David said, this is just our quick overview. They are going through kind of an exhaustively, making sure we captured all the comments. But as you can imagine, that's a big task. So they're working on that right now.
Yeah, I can confirm that is the case. John and Russell and I all met right before this meeting, and we have an action item to pull that together. We have the recording from the webinar, and we're pulling the notes together into a straw man. So what we're hoping to by the July 8th meeting is to kind of have an outline of kind of what we're going to include in the implementation guide. We're going to inform it from the original work that we're building off of. To remind everybody, the joint document content work group that was held by Care Quality and Commonwealth. So they're going to help me do some reconnaissance on that document and see what we can pull into the Sequoia IG, because some of these pain points had some guidance already provided in them. For instance, this topic, effective use of codes, especially around labs, there was some guidance in that document that we want to build off of. So we want to make sure that the breadcrumbs are put in place. So we'll be reviewing that document moving forward. We just didn't have time to pull together a draft before today's meeting. But July 8th, you'll see a start of that, and it'll continue to be improved upon from input from the collaboration space, from you, from these meetings. We may have additional workshop meetings. I'm not saying that one workshop was one and done. We may hold additional stakeholder meetings, like around public health or around the consumer specifically. We're still determining where the gaps are and where where we need more input.
So one other question there around is you're mentioning the implementation guide. This goes to reference to the workshop itself. Is the implementation guide is great, but did the group talk about adoption? How, I mean, from the provider side is one, you've got to be able to utilize this, but the two, you've got to pressure your vendor to implement this in that way.
Yeah. So just so you'll know, you're absolutely right. So again, we're building off the Commonwealth Care Quality. They're the triggers right now that can make any changes to industry based on their current work, the Joint Document Content Workgroup work, and they're in process of putting a timeline around it. That was drafted as of September 2020, and nobody started the clock ticking on when that should be implemented by. So they're still working on that part of it. To your point, we need the same type of trigger for the Sequoia IG. The goal there will be to work collaboratively again with Commonwealth Care Quality, so they have ways to interject those requirements into their, their stakeholder base, whether they're implementers or whatever. We also will be using the guidance from the IG that's drafted by Sequoia to inform the RCE TESCA requirements, the minimum requirements, the alternative requirements of the technical framework that's associated to TESCA will also be informed by that, which would also in turn give you a trigger that's tied to something of a regulatory body. Again, it won't happen overnight, it won't happen immediately, but those are kind of the low-hanging fruit that we're looking at as where we would put the triggers in place to hopefully get implementers to actually do it by X date. If there's other situations, I know Chic has their own framework. There's other groups that we'll probably be reaching out to that do give guidance to their implementers inside of their policy frameworks. So working with various networks like that as well in the future. So but we would welcome suggestions from you guys, other opportunities. We'll be working with the federal agencies, the federal health architecture folks, for instance, providing this governance back to them as potential input as well. And ultimately also improving the HL7 specifications around fire for data, as well as the CCDA specifications. So I'm hoping that we'll improve the standards, but also policies can point to these to have some sort of timelines to actually get them implemented.
So Dee, I think Commonwealth and Care Quality can only encourage their vendors to what they submit, what is outgoing, but they really can't control what it is the vendors present to the clinicians, right? They don't have a say there. I think I think that's where the idea of having they can push for standards with the government, and I think the government has to, through its certification process, has to be the one place where EHRs can be made to bend to what you come up with. I don't see any other way, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think you're right. Until it's regulatory, people don't tend to do it sometimes. So, but we're in a good position to help inform that, hopefully. Sorry about that, David.
No. I was going to say I couldn't agree more. Until there's actual policy behind the advocacy, there's there's a lot of guidance out there and a lot of work, and until a uniform way and defining parameters of usability when it comes to the context of this or any any aspect of usability, and until that there are some regulatory parameters around it, or some other way to more strongly encourage adoption. I think that's really where the rubber will meet the road with moving this forward.
Yeah, there is thought about improving the certification requirements, but also I know that at Sequoia we're gearing up to provide the testing tools to provide, testing against some of these requirements so that folks will know what they don't know, for instance. Doing production level PHI-based testing on networks so that folks can get informed where they're missing the point. Again, that's based on what's exchanged, but you got to also remember that also informs the data as it's captured. Because back to the usability, from a clinician perspective, you need to make sure that it's streamlined, useful, but also captured in the right way. So I think there's lots of different synergies there.
And I do also need to go ahead.
Go ahead.
All I was going to add was
you go ahead, David. Go ahead.
Well, this is Bill. I was just going to add that, I think that really the appeal to ONC and kind of on the certification side is all of these improvements, especially on that receiver side, really go to reducing provider burden, which I know is one of their big charges. And so I think we just keep hitting that point as really the value of this is we can do all this exchange we want, but we will not improve. We will only worsen the provider burden unless we do these other things too.
Agreed. And I think we have to keep our eyes open and realize that not all vendors want interoperability as much as some other vendors do. So the ones that don't really want it to work they're not doing everything they can, I think, to promote it. So we just have to be very cognizant of that.
Fair point.
This is Gary Dickinson. I'm looking at this again. We established early on that data usability is as viewed from the perspective of the end user or end use. And I think the discussion over the last few minutes has emphasized that as well, that what happens in the ultimate at the point of use is entirely dependent on not only how that system functions, but following that back upstream through the exchange back to the source system is crucial to ensure that the right information gets to that endpoint and that you have appropriate context, that you have ensured, for example, that the purpose of capture is really compatible with the intended or the actual purpose of use. And some of these things are very difficult challenges because oftentimes people react to what they see and have a hard time have a hard time dealing with the fact that the information actually came through this data stream from a source through exchange to a receiver, and that the actual problem may not be on the receiver side. It's actually maybe in the exchange something got lost or context went missing or whatever it is, the appropriate linkages between various things, problems and orders and results and all of these kinds of things, and then back to the source system. So I think it's that entire end-to-end piece that we really need to remain cognizant of and make sure that we're not addressing one point in the chain, that we're actually looking at the chain of trust from source to use.
Right. Good point. Very good point.
This is Adam Davis, and I'm a physician informaticist at Sutter and the co-chair of the Care Everywhere Governing Council for EPIC. It's interesting to hear. I haven't been able to. I just got out of clinic, so I haven't been able to hear the entire conversation today, and I'm new to this group. But it's interesting to hear a little bit about how the concerns are a little bit about, well, if one vendor does it this way and another vendor does it that way. And I agree with that. We're in the EPIC world at Sutter, and cross-vendor exchange is not nearly where EPIC to EPIC is. But specifically on labs, even EPIC to EPIC exchange is not where we would want it to be. And they're trying hard. And so I think if we only focus on, something is lost in the conversation when we get into the usability piece. There's actually within, and this will be interesting because it's a tougher conversation to have in some ways. There's an inherent conflict by different parts of the health system within a single health system, and specifically in labs. I think the lab directors and pathologists, they like being very specific about the lab test. That which sodium was this? Where was what type of machine did they run that sodium on, and all that detail. The splitters, we'll call them. And then clinicians are like, I sort of, if that institution said that they have a sodium of 140, that's enough for me to trust it, right? And those are the groupers. And there's this inherent tension there that's real, and value is on both sides. But I think we're going to need to deal, especially in labs, if we want to have a usable lab exchange, we're going to have to deal with that tension and make recommendations that address that specific tension that is not in the necessarily in the how we code the data that is exchanged, but is also in what we consider, like enough, or how we determine what is like enough. Because that's the part that is causing the mapping to get out of control, and in a way that just makes it undoable for an individual health system to map to every other health system for every component of every lab order. It's just not a viable activity.
Yeah. No, those are great practical points, and I think your description around the lumpers and the splitters, I think that is one of the most important tensions, and so as we look at it, and those types of discussions came up in this, where you have that very granular coding, but if you've got to lump it, and for depending upon your use case, can you more effectively use value sets and things like that? I think we underutilize things like that, and how can we make it easier for a given system to do it? Because you're right, this is a big burden for an individual hospital system or outpatient system to be able to maintain these things. So how can we really make that process easier for that lumping and splitting? Because there is a time when we do need that really highly granular, but no, not everybody does. And in order to be able to lump it effectively, you've got to make that easy for them to do that.
And I guess I would add one more thought there is, can we build a trust network? And what I mean by that is, I'll just take a Northern California example. If UCSF mapped something from Stanford, that they said, oh yeah, that sodium is like our sodium, we can map that. And then we map something from UCSF. When we receive that from Stanford, can there be a transitive? And that gets back to the usability piece, right? Like, it's not necessarily something that's going to be information, but how vendors are using the information and how they're. But I think until we get to some sort of trust algorithm, we're not going to be able to. We're not going to be able to do the amount of mapping that it takes at the local level to really get the usable data into the streams that the clinicians need it at.
Yeah, I would argue with that a little bit. I don't know why individual organizations cannot do the mapping that they need to. I think that is a doable task. I've seen it done.
Really?
It's a constant activity. It's a constant activity, but you know what system your lab is running. You know what kind of instruments it's being run on. You can link your codes.
Sorry. I'm going to just push back for like the advanced trending labs that for advanced lab mapping. There's no health system in America that's done it in a way that allows them to trend anything beyond hemoglobin A1C and COVID antibodies, because they've expended a tremendous amount of energy in doing those two labs. But when they've got on to do CBCs or chemistries, they haven't been able to do it. So if you have an example that's not true for at an individual health system level, I'd love to see it, because sitting on the governing council and talking about this nationally, I haven't seen it. I know Sutter can't do it. It's just too much work.
But trending is a different thing. But coding your individual labs, is that something you say is not possible? You cannot do it?
No. Sorry. All our labs are coded. That's not what mapping is. When I'm talking about interoperability, mapping is when you get a lab from someone else's institution, is the mapping it to your internal results so that it can show up in this places where again, this is about usability, right? So show up where the clinician expects it to be, act on clinical decision support the way they would expect it to act, and be able to be trended with local labs. So yes, I agree that anybody who has a lab, almost by definition, should be able to map the labs that they're creating. It's dealing with the multiplicative of all the other trading partners in your local area and all the components of their labs. It literally is not a doable piece of work.
I would agree with that. No, that's you cannot always do that with, and trending is dependent upon that. So that's true. but at least you could say what things are alike. You could group them, and I think that's up to the standards organizations to help us with that grouping of those very specific codes.
I think that pretty well brings us to the next. If we can go to the next slide, which is is a frequent occurrence. And so unidentified information takes time to filter. This was, again, going back to that provider burden. So we posed the questions around what are the most significant issues with duplication and kind of balancing reduction in those duplicates with risk of information loss and patient safety concerns. And kind of this is where it kind of overlaps a little bit with the idea of grouping. So if we can't effectively identify these things that are coming to us from outside, how can we deduplicate? And is it a universal problem, or is it one that really goes from one organization to another? So the responses we got were clearly that duplicates were an issue. The issue was really more around, is felt to be around problems, meds, and allergies were felt to be among the most important. Partly because, I think everyone sees, is between one system and another, you might get a lot of instances of codes for CHF or for diabetes, and they might be interspersed across different encounters. And so you'll end up with a lot of noise associated with that. There was some caution that came from the group around if we do deduplicate and maybe that it's not, full on deduplication, but kind of hiding things or collapsing things together, which is kind of alluding to the theme we had from the previous discussion. We have to take into account all metadata. And the example that was brought up was around allergies. So you might have multiple captures of allergies, but one reaction might be different than another. So we got to make sure that we deduplicate across all of the data so that we don't lose the one allergy that was captured that said the patient had anaphylaxis to penicillin versus another that said the patient had a mild rash. And so that was one of the things that was noted. They felt that if full deduplication is not possible, then kind of grouping same or similar items together. I've got this listing of problems and then kind of collapsing them together. Several brought up the idea that AI will likely have a role in this kind of as an evolving capability, but I think this goes to what Adam was bringing up around, doing the deduplication, or in the previous discussion, really making effective use of that data coming from another system is an onerous task. I will bring up, kind of as Adam was said, we have not tackled this at our organization yet, although because of the number of hospitals we have, even collapsing and normalizing data across all of our entities is a huge challenge. And so that's exactly how we're tackling it, is taking and being able to map all of the individual mnemonics and names across our enterprise, and then creating value sets to really collapse things further so that we can define an A1C. We had this issue with lactate. Across our enterprise, we had hundreds of representations of lactate. And actually, if you look at the LOINC codes, there's 11 different LOINC codes. So we created a value set just around that. We've used this mostly in our analytics, but I think it's a challenge. The EHRs don't necessarily reflect this. So I think that tension is going to continue. But that was the main take home around the duplicates. And I think it goes to what David was saying, is there's a lot of overlap between these issues. Any thoughts on this one? All right. I think we can move on to the next slide, and I'll hand it over to David.
Yeah, and again, these really do, kind of flow together, and so it is really if you're talking about, how best to organize the data, at the point of care, and we're talking about how we use codes, of the deduplication problem, and things like that. This is really tied to the aggregate or longitudinal record, and it's defined, as the patient summary and the one encounter summary per encounter. And that's really the continuum of care in a longitudinal way. And, it comes down to the signal and noise ratio. We're looking for the quality versus the quantity of the content, and really how the context is tied to any particular piece of data. And the questions around, either the tagging or searchability of that content within, when again, coming externally into native workflow. The questions that we really came up to really focus were, what were the important types of information that are searchable and filterable, in kind of the native EHR. But then when it's coming in, externally, in particular, from disparate EHRs and disparate health systems, what are the important data that's a challenge to find at the point of care? Is there, would you like there are specific data types that just you want to be able to filter out when looking at summaries and encounters? And then really, coming down to the comment that, I think what, that Marty made earlier had to do with, you getting all the data, you're the requester, you're getting all the data, but as the end user, as the clinician, if you're the requester, what would be the optimal filtering and searching capabilities that you'd like to see with that external summary data to really make it more usable from a clinical standpoint at the point of care? And one, it's really the interesting, thing that really came out immediately was really the narrative and notes. And that's to be able to find the information in the narrative and the notes, and be able to filter that effectively. More, they're kind of getting away more here from discrete codified data elements to really being able to tie together the context that is represented in the narrative and the notes. And that they also came up with a high value of a patient-centric view over the encounter-centric view of that data, and being able to sort of tie, say, notes across all of the encounters across the longitudinal record, and be able to sift through that information from a contextual standpoint. And that was really, I think, the overwhelming high-level theme that came out there. And obviously, it kind of went back and forth with, the codes, the value sets, indexing, and things like that. But this is one where the notes and the aspect of notes and being able to search through notes that have occurred across the continuum of care coming in externally. So, sorry, I see a different slide up here.
I think
see the
slide
guidance
was advanced to the next one accidentally.
Got it. Okay. All right.
I think we're trying to make sure we get through most of them in time. So sorry about that.
Oh, sorry. So I'll open it up to any additional comments or feedback from the data tagging and searchability.
All right.
Exhausted all our commentary earlier on.
I think moving on to the next one, the specific. This was kind of a lumping together of a lot of different issues that we wanted to capture around things where there might be excessive amount of information, the situations where information might not be well presented. We didn't get as much consensus here, but again, kind of alluding to the previous one that David was talking through, there was a lot of discussion around note formatting and even things like standards for readability, APSO versus SOAP notes, and acknowledging the high amount of noise with all of the volumes of data, kind of being able to simplify the UI. So this ties again back to that end recipient, the requester of the data, and how can we do that? So I do think with all the comments we received earlier, this is going to be one of our big challenges, and we want to make sure that is not lost. What is going to be incumbent upon those receiving systems? But to also the other points, we've only got so much effort that we can put in to be able to make sure things are mapped and things are happening appropriately to be able to be those lumpers and splitters as we need to. So I think that's going to be one of our big challenges, not just to create the implementation guide, but how do we insert this into the national dialogue to make sure that it happens. So that was really what came out of that one. I think we can move on to the next one.
And so okay, got it. Thanks. Effective use of narrative for the usability. I think this, obviously came up repeatedly and was a common theme, both with our, our phase one work here, but in the clinician group that, the prioritization of all this codified discrete data is that's easily stored and understand is very important. We've had a lot of conversation, but again, getting back to the context, or as we've called it, semantic interoperability. How can we tie and most effectively leverage narrative from a usability standpoint? And that's how can we provide the guidance so that effective use of narrative is tied to the context, and again, as the receiving system, it's easily digestible and can be used at the point of care. And we're really, it was just a subset of one question, is that, should that clinical narrative always be included when there is a primarily just discrete information shared? So, with automated care summaries. Are there specific scenarios where it's more useful for that narrative to be tied to it? And in what ways have the context between the narrative and the discrete data be improved in these documents that just tells the patient's story and integrates to help, clinical decision support and medical decision making within workflow? We ran out of time at this point, so it wasn't discussed much, but it was such a common thread in other sections that we're going to, really need to revisit and dive into it and make it available when it exists. And I think we can move on to the next one, unless there's a comment there.
Let me ask a question. Yeah, let me ask a quick question about that, because we didn't really discuss this slide directly in that group. Are you planning on having another workshop with the same crew to actually go after this one specifically? I mean, it came up in a lot of different contexts, but we never talked about this slide particularly.
Yeah, we didn't. We ran out of time, and I think the plan is, and I'll defer to Dee and the team. I think the hope is that this isn't a one and done with the workshop, and to bring it back. I think that's the plan. But
yeah, I can confirm that. In fact, I spoke to John and Russell, who's helping me. We probably won't have a workshop in the next week or month. We'll probably wait till closer to after summer dies down, more like the August timeframe. But what we were hoping to do is start drafting the IG, finding other gaps, and including these questions with that. But that doesn't preclude us. Remember, we're going to push this out to the larger work group, all 290 plus work group members, to get this input. Even if we didn't cover it in the workshop, we are going to push it to the workshop members as well as to the work group members. So we're hoping to get some of this ad hoc through that collaboration space as well. But in other words, it's not a one and done. We will also do other workshops. I just don't think we're going to do one in the next few weeks or months. We're going to probably push it until closer to August before we entertain a second one.
And I would add the same issue applies to the last slide, which is around data integrity and trust. We'll want to capture that through the collaboration space for the same reason. I mean, this was another one that the thread was seen in other areas, and I think Gary brought it up today as well. It'll have an important interplay, especially in how we can reduce duplications and have that trust in the data. So definitely want your feedback through the collaboration space on these ones that we weren't able to get to, and we'll likely have some more formal ones, but as Dee Dee said, just not in the near term.
And we will be pushing out a message to remind everybody who were not on the call today that they could listen to this recording, but also to please, we'll give them some, pointers to definitely go to the collaboration space and provide us some input in their absence leading up to the July 8th meeting, so we can take what we've gotten at that point. And then we may even, one of the things I entertained when talking to Russell and John were, we may want to set up subgroups. So it may not be a workshop. We may be inviting specific work group members to an ad hoc meeting or something that's not a workshop, but another one of these type of work group meetings, but with a specific stakeholder focus, like consumer or public health. So there's lots of ways we can do it. We're masters of our own domain, as I mentioned earlier. So we can try to decide. If you have suggestions for something we should do differently, let us know. But we're going to try to hopefully depend on the collaboration space so that we keep things rolling, but being able to do things in parallel. And I've got that it's the top of the hour. Any other questions from the work group members? Well, I'll leave the final comments to finish us out to the co-chairs, David and Bill.
Thank you, Dee Dee. No, I think this was a good discussion. Appreciate the ongoing feedback. My take-home message is go to the collaboration space at the bottom of the website and check it out. Give some feedback.
Thank you. Yeah, I echo those comments exactly. Thank you for the participation, and please do go to the collaboration space and give us your thoughts. Really appreciate it. Thanks.
Have a great week, everyone, and thanks for your participation today. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.